Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for August 11th, 2021, recorded on 2:10 p.m. Eastern Time. A lot to talk about today, including the potential for two tropical cyclones to be impacting portions of the greater Antilles over the next several days. And a look at Tropical Storm Fred, which could be impacting Florida within the next several days. So let's go and jump straight into everything. Taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, we are monitoring two systems out there as of today. We have Tropical Storm Fred, which became a tropical storm as of 11 p.m. last night, as a area of low pressure did form and now is consolidated. This will be moving over Hispaniola in the Dominican Republic today and heading towards Florida, the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, and Cuba within the next couple of days. And then we are also keeping our eyes on another tropical wave now labeled Invest Area 95L, which is this wave over here. Currently, development chances aren't really that high, but this will be moving quickly towards the west northwest over the next several days and will be in roughly the same spot that Fred is within the next week or so. This will be approaching the Lesser Antilles once again, towards the northern part of the island chain this time. And once it gets closer to the Antilles, development chances will begin to go up from there. And especially once this reaches the central Atlantic, we also have another tropical wave that we'll probably have to keep an eye on, as development chances of this are now starting to be picked up by some of the ensemble members of the Euro. And this wave will be moving out into the Atlantic within the next 24 hours or so. So looking here at the track forecast of Tropical Storm Fred, again, this is now a tropical storm, and with that, again, we lose the potential tropical cyclone tag. So this became a tropical storm last night south of Puerto Rico and is now at 45 miles per hour. Again, kind of moving due kind of west-northwest. Again, it made a little bit of a westward jog from last night into this morning, as again, some of the train influences from the mountains over here of Hispaniola caused us to kind of deflect a little bit. But this is expected to weaken today and into tomorrow, and expected to kind of become a tropical depression by tomorrow. Now, it is entirely possible that this does degenerate completely and a new area of low pressure develops north of here and becomes the primary surface low and tracks something along here. Now, you can see here in the track forecast from the Hurricane Center, this is expected to regain tropical storm status within the next 36 hours and be a tropical storm, even potentially a strong tropical storm upon landfall here in the Florida Panhandle within the next few days or so. You can see the cone outlined here. Again, kind of zooming in here, we notice that this will be coming awfully closer to the Florida Keys, even may make landfall there. And then from there, this traverses towards the west-northwest, making landfall here in the western Florida Panhandle on by late week. And we could be looking at a slightly stronger storm in here, or potentially even a weaker storm, depending on what happens with it, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Now, if we look here at the visible satellite imagery from this afternoon, we can see that we have a couple of intriguing things going on right now with the storm. The low-level center is still a bit displaced from where the mid-level center was, or supposedly still is. Again, we had an old mid-level circulation that was down here, and this has been kind of trailing the storm throughout the last couple of days. This was in part that old mid-level center that was trying to compete with what is now trying to be a vertically aligned storm, at least for the time being. We can tell that, again, we have convection that has wrapped up shear, and this is in part because of a lot of land friction, because, again, this is the island here, and this is, of course, then all the mountains here of Hispaniola. But, again, a lot of this is caused by land friction, and so we have wrapping convergence here from the land. If we didn't have this, this would probably be a very sheared mess, because if you kind of look out here just north of where the storm is currently, you notice that we have a lot of upper level cirrus clouds that are stretching kind of back towards the east like that, from west to east. And that's because we have an upper level low, which if we kind of zoom out here and look at the water vapor loop, there's this broad upper level disturbance right now over Florida, which has been sitting there for the last couple of days. And this is now beginning to impart a little bit of southwesterly vertical wind shear over top of the storm environment right now. Now, this upper level low, because it's been here for the last few days, this is going to eventually start to back out of the frame here, it began to lift and eject back towards the northwest, but it is still going to be causing a little bit of shear across this area. And it is entirely possible that the shear doesn't quite go away. But what is likely to happen is as the system approaches the Florida Peninsula rather, in the Bahamas over here, this will likely begin to generate its own outflow, and a new upper level anticyclone will likely develop over top of the storm and be able to better fend off the southwesterly vertical wind shear that is going to be impinging on our storm for the next several days. And this is one of the main reasons why the storm really won't get much stronger, even if a new low level center begins to jump over here, which is entirely possible. And another thing we'll have to look for is whether or not we have a storm that ends up trying to deflect more towards the north. Again, some of these islands here, because with the very high mountainous terrain in through here, you get slower winds that move over the mountains than you do over the water here because there's less friction. And because there's less friction, you may in fact get a center that sort of does something like this, where it kind of jogs itself northward and then continues on its original northward track. And some of the models have been hinting on that for the last several days now. So we're going to have to see how that plays out, which we'll take a look at here in the models in a minute. Again, we're also focusing our eyes on a new tropical wave, Invest Area 95L, to the southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands over here. And this wave, much like Fred, will end up in the same relative area within the next 5 or 6 days and could become a tropical storm prior to the islands. And this could be something that the islands are going to have to watch a little bit more carefully than Fred, in my opinion, as the environment for this system, while it will be complicated and does have something to do with Fred, will by and large be a little bit more favorable. And this is one of the reasons why I do believe that 95L could be a bigger problem to the islands than Fred ever was. And that's going to be something that we're going to have to talk about here in a minute with the modeling. Now, if we go back to the 850 millibar vorticity, this is the spin in the atmosphere at about 5,000 feet off the ground. And for context here, these reds and whites, that's your high cyclonic spin at 5,000 feet. And what we notice here is we have, this is Invest Area 95L right here. We have a pretty nice consolidating bundle of energy focused around here. And this is one of the things that really catches my attention. The fact that it's actually bundled in the 850 vorticity here does prove to me that there is a little bit more energy here to work with as this moves generally towards kind of the west or northwest like such. Now, there's going to be some interesting things, and one of this is that, again, if you look here at the visible satellite imagery, what we have right now, we have an area of low pressure that is either elongated in a wave axis from south-southwest to kind of north-northeast like this, or we could even have a closed but elongated surface low that's located in here. We could have that closed elongated surface low. Now, with that being said, though, you notice that we do have some pretty strong fetch here of easterly shear, pushing all of these clouds in convection far away from the low-level center. And this is what we previously saw with Invest 93L, back just a few days ago before Fred formed. We had 93L that looked very similar in this part of the world. And one of the reasons for that, again, we have this tropical easterly jet that is just screaming across here right now. But this isn't all that bad for development. And we can look here in the GFS forecast. This is the, we'll take a look here at the 850 vorticity map. And again, this is the spin in the atmosphere at 5,000 feet off the ground. So we'll look at the steering components with Fred first, and then we'll kind of talk about 95L here. We'll go from left to right here. So looking at Fred first, again, we notice that our wave energy or our tropical storm energy is located right about here, and it is probably now crossing the island and is making landfall probably at this point. Now we have a broad upper level high that is we have a broad area of high pressure that is sitting over here, which is generally steering our storm to the west and northwest like such. And that's one of the reasons why the storm really hasn't been able to gain a significant amount of latitude over the last couple of days because of this ridge of high pressure. Now, if we look here at the 200 millibar wind pattern, again, what we'll notice, we have this broad upper level high that is, or upper level low that is kind of just sitting here across the Florida Panhandle and Peninsula. which we've been seeing for really the last several days, is this broad area of low pressure that's just been sitting across here. And eventually, this will be backing towards the west northwest. And at the same time, though, this imparts a little bit of southwesterly vertical wind shear, probably modest shear, should I say, at about 15 to 20 knots of shear across the storm. And what we can tell here is in the forecast, again, we get this pattern where this upper level low is just sitting right across here, and our storm at this time would be somewhere right in about here. Now, at this time, if we look at the surface in the 850 vorticity, what we notice here is that in the GFS forecast, at least, we have a pretty elongated and non-closed surface low. And this is probably nothing more than a sharp wave axis. You can kind of see those the wave symbol there. And that just indicates that we have a sharp trough axis that's in through here, but this is not a closed surface low. And what's entirely possible is that we actually may get degeneration of this as a tropical cyclone and may end up repicking up here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, which we can see here on the GFS forecast is indicated there by Sunday morning. Now, if we jump to the 200 millibar wind at that same time, here's this upper level low here that has been backing towards the northeast and is now beginning, or northwest, and it's beginning to get washed out. And as it's getting washed out here, again, it is still imparting a little bit of southwesterly vertical wind shear over top our storm, but it has led to the potential for a favorable trough interaction where there is a little bit of poleward outflow. You can kind of see this outflow here, especially on the northern, eastern, and southern sides of here, but there is still the southwestern shear that would be pushing convection off towards the northeast of the storm, so kind of down shear of this. And this is kind of what we've seen in some of, like, for instance, Elsa. This was much of the case with Elsa just a couple of weeks ago, if you remember that. It's been actually a month ago, really. But this is pretty much what we've been really looking for all along. But we can tell if we look here at the storm environment that, again, the environment itself just isn't all that favorable. And again, we have a lot of shear that is at the upper part here of the atmosphere, but we also have some fairly anomalous dry air that is across in the middle part of the atmosphere. And what this dry air does, again, as it's going to sink here, it warms the air temperature here, and eventually you kind of create a capping inversion because you're mixing some of that dry air, and that mixing ratio would create just a little bit of capping inversion through here as you're warming the air temperature from a lifted parcel. And it's a lot of synoptic meteorology that kind of goes behind that, a lot of different processes there. But by and large, that would increase the air temperature where we have just a little bit of a capping inversion, enough to suppress thunderstorm activity. And again, that would be one thing that we'll be looking for. Now, if we jump back to the 850 vorticity, another thing that we're going to have to look for, as indicated by the GFS here, is there could in fact be two areas where we may get possible consolidation. The first area is going to be kind of this northern part of the wave envelope that is positioned near the Turks and Caicos by tomorrow evening. And this may be one to also consolidate. And if it does so, this might be something to watch for portions of the Bahamas and the east coast of Florida. And if this part of the wave ends up kind of being the dominant, which again, the models are suggesting the latter of that, where the southern wave envelope becomes the primary one, this will be something eventually for the Florida Keys and then the west coast of Florida to monitor over the next couple of days or so. We're really watching these two areas to see how they compete. And again, a lot is going to matter on how this ends up developing, how this kind of ends up traversing the very high train of Hispaniola over here, and what ends up happening beyond that point down here. And again, we can kind of take a look here at the HWRF model for this. Again, the HWRF, again, usually some of the more aggressive models here, like the HWRF, doesn't really seem to suggest too much. And in fact, the 12Z run, though, did have it strengthening a little bit. Now, we can see again that this does kind of cross Hispaniola. It weakens pretty substantially, and for a time, we may end up with an open wave that's in across here. Now, one thing to kind of keep in mind with the HWRF and some of the other global models even is that they do have the aircraft data that's been assimilated into them. But the HWRF is usually one of the more aggressive runs. And honestly, I haven't even seen this model run quite yet. But it does seem to want to explosively develop our storm and have it on a general track towards kind of the southern Florida coast here. And this would be one of the more extreme cases. We're not going to really show it to landfall, but this would be one of the more extreme cases. Now, for comparison's sake, the HMON for this time is much less aggressive, but even does have a pretty potent storm here. This would be about 987 millibars or 988 millibars, making its way towards kind of Mobile Bay, Alabama by this time. So either way, we will likely have impacts, but again, what impacts from this storm remains to be seen, and that's the biggest question at this particular time. So a lot is going to depend on how that interaction occurs after that point. Now we'll turn our attention back out to Invest Area 95L. And again, the GFS in particular is not really too enthused with this wave. And if we kind of go back, one of the main problems here, if we look at the simulated IR satellite for this, is just there's not really a lot of convection with this. And it's very convectively anemic on the model. And in fact, as of 9 a.m., this was the initialization time, basically 13Z, because the IR satellites load an hour later. They are typically, again, the GFS just doesn't have a good handle on this, and the fact that it is very convectively anemic. And even on IR satellite, for what it's worth, again, we can look at the infrared satellite, and we can just tell that, again, it's just not close to reality. And even if we move this forward, that, maybe looks a little bit more close to reality, but in more so we have a lot of convection that's across here. Now, certainly this area is definitely dry, devoid of any convection because of that shear, but the GFS doesn't have a good handle, and in fact, it kind of collapses that convection by 3 a.m. this morning, or 3 a.m. tomorrow morning, and that's probably not going to happen. In fact, when we have the diurnal maximum that will be occurring during this time, which increases convective activity and convective potential. So the GFS is already one of the models that's kind of not really handling this performance really well. Now, again, we talked about how the influence of Fred could impact 95L, and here's the thing. If models like the HWRF or even the HMON did come to fruition, we would have a stronger upper level ridge that kind of sets up downstream of here. And what this would end up kind of creating is a little bit more shear that would radiate out towards the islands, such that when 95L approaches the islands, it has a pretty tough time going if it's not already strong. And a lot of the models agree that this probably won't be a super high-end system by the time it approaches the islands. So again, a lot's going to depend here on the intensity of Fred, because again, if we look at the 200 millibar wind, and this again is in the upper part of the atmosphere, we have a lot of easterly shear right now. But this easterly shear, again, is going to be favorable later on because, again, it would create an upper-level anticyclone and help to create divergence aloft and convergence at the surface. And we can see this here in the model. This is 12Z Sunday. A nice upper-level anticyclone develops with our tropical cyclone supposedly downstream of that, which is a very favorable position for this part of the world for tropical cyclones. Again, here's this broad upper-level anticyclone here. It's just not really all that strong because of the fact that in this particular run of the GFS, the model doesn't really have a strong cyclone. But if we kind of go back to the previous run, this was 1,002 millibars on the 60 run, valid for, again, the same time on Sunday at 8 a.m., we have a stronger upper-level anticyclone as a result of a stronger storm near the Florida West Coast. And again, the upper-level anticyclone that would be running in here around the storm, around 95L, would eventually be running into this. And this is going to remain for quite some time, because if we look here at the GFS forecast, again, this upper-level anticyclone just kind of sits here for several days, and it actually kind of impacts downstream there. And we can see that in the previous run, even, it's actually a little bit more stronger because of the fact that, again, we had a stronger tropical cyclone that moved inland, and that creates the stronger outflow pattern here. So a lot kind of depends on how that's going to evolve. And one of the other things I must say about this is a stronger storm initially. And you can see here in the model, it just doesn't really develop it. And I don't really believe that too much. But the model, for what it's worth, is trying to go with something weak here. Now, if it is a weaker storm, this will follow much the same trajectory as what Fred is doing currently, where it runs into the islands. And if something isn't already trying to get established by then, it probably won't get established. However, if it is stronger, like suggested on the European ensembles and some of the GFS ensembles, which you can take a look at right now, if we look here at the GFS ensembles and the ensemble mean sea level pressure, we can kind of look to kind of see that some of the stronger runs here of the GFS ensembles have a storm going north of the islands instead of in between or south of the islands. And these are all ranges of possibilities. Now, the Euro model, for what it's worth, the Euro ensembles from the 0Z run had, again, much of the similar solution where stronger storm is going to likely deflect more around the islands. A weaker storm is going to be in the middle or south of the islands. And then we may even have a third tropical wave that ends up coming out here within the next couple of days. And then maybe after that, a fourth. It's going to be a really busy time, kind of chaotic now. But again, there's a lot of complex interactions that could be ongoing across this part of the world for the next while. So again, we're going to have to really see. But again, a lot is going to depend on what happens here with Fred, and the intensity that Fred ends up getting is going to dramatically impact the development chances here and what is the eventual outcome of 95L. So for the time being, it looks likely that, again, Fred will probably be weaker on approach to the Florida Panhandle or Peninsula, and as such, that 95L will have a greater chance at developing and kind of moving north of the islands for the time being. That's not a guarantee, though. Again, this could easily slide south of the islands or go right in between, down towards like Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, much like what Fred is doing currently. So it is entirely possible. All three of those outcomes are entirely possible. Right now, I'm leading a little bit more credence to the Euro. If we jump back to the Euro 850 vorticity, again, we can see that the Euro does generate a surface vortex that would try to be a tropical cyclone. And this is sufficiently north of the islands at this point where land interaction wouldn't be a problem, and we would have to see where it goes from there. All right. So with that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael Romali. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.